Black Christmas. So, talking about one of the most beloved slasher films of all time. But why should I do it when there are a billion other videos on YouTube about Black Christmas already? Because I read the book. Yeah, I read that book by Lee Hayes. That was hard to find. Okay, so Black Christmas is a legendary slasher flick. It was directed by Bob Clark. Now, he would done Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things, which I've never seen, and Death Dream just before this, but he didn't really do any more horror films after this. This was very much one of those classic kind of, he did hard to get his foot in the door and then kind of never really looked back. And he had a weird career, too. I mean, even just his two Christmas movies are Black Christmas, serial killer in a sorority house, knocking girls off, at Christmas time, and A Christmas Story, with Ralphie. You'll put your eye out. I want a BB gun. I never really saw the appeal in that movie. It was never one of my favorites. If I was going to do a Christmas comedy, I'd probably do Bad Santa or Christmas Vacation. But whatever. People love it. And if you own a TV and have cable, you've seen it. You just can't avoid it. It is on constantly. TBS used to show it on a 24-hour marathon, actually. Anyway, aside from that, he did Rhinestone, that Sylvester Stallone country singer movie. Anyone remember that? I gotta wonder, for Stallone, is he more ashamed of Rhinestone, where he tried to sing country music, or that porno he did in the 70s? I'm genuinely curious. I'd honestly probably be more ashamed of Rhinestone. And then he did Baby Geniuses, which is kind of funny because my brother rented that one time, back when it first came out, thinking it was an action movie. I have no idea why. And his final film was uncredited. There was some sort of weird screw up with his citizenship, and he couldn't be credited for directing Blonde and Blonder, which apparently bothered him, which is kind of astonishing. I don't know why you'd want credit for the movie, like a buddy movie starring Pamela Anderson and Denise Richards. But yeah, he wasn't credited for that movie for some reason. Well, I mean, the reason it had something to do with citizenship. I assume the DGA, Directors Guild of America. I don't know. Honestly, I didn't care enough to look, but he died tragically. He actually died while trying to get credit for that movie. And honestly, they should have just given it to him. I mean, the man died, for God's sake. If he wants credit for directing Blonde and Blonder, just who else? I mean, if I directed Blonde and Blonder, I'd pretty much let anyone who wanted it take credit for it. Anyway, so he did Black Christmas, and Black Christmas is one of the more interesting things about Black Christmas is its star, Olivia Hussey. Now, Olivia Hussey had become very famous in the late 60s for a very successful adaptation of William Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, where she played Juliet. And she was definitely considered to be too big for this movie. Now, they basically won the lottery in that she was a nut. Now, I mean, it was the 70s, but her psychic told her to do the movie, so she did the movie, and it actually really damaged her career. And to kind of put that in context to today, Olivia Hussey doing Black Christmas in the mid 70s would be kind of like if Claire Danes, you remember Claire Danes, who was in that Baz Luhrmann William Shakespeare Romeo and Juliet movie with Leonardo DiCaprio in the mid 90s? It would be like if Claire Danes had done that movie and then maybe 3 years later did a slasher film. It was very weird. She had more clout than this movie would seem to allow for. So anyway, and this movie really damaged her career. After this, she did not have a lot of major projects. Her career pretty much tanked out after this. It really kind of delegitimized her, which is sad. But you ever see the Ice Cream Man with Clint Howard, that god awful slasher from the early '90s? She's in that. That's just embarrassing. So yeah, you got Olivia Hussey and you got John Saxon. Now John Saxon also is kind of weird that he was in this movie, not because he was necessarily too big for it. John Saxon was a that guy actor. John Saxon was one of those actors who just managed to keep his career going. Like he would have one hit per decade, basically. He broke out in the '50s, I believe. He had I actually think he got an Oscar nomination in the '50s. Then in the '60s, he kind of did they did a western that I believe did very well. Then in the '70s, he was in Enter the Dragon, the Bruce Lee kung fu movie. Then in the '80s, he played the dad in Nightmare on Elm Street, the cop. So he just kind of kept getting like one major hit per decade that would kind of carry him through the decade. So, and John Saxon as the cop in this movie was actually a last minute replacement for a guy I believe named Edmund OBrien, who I am not familiar with, but he was an old school Hollywood guy. Like if you look at his IMDb, all the posters look like they're from the '40s. But they hired Edmund O'Brien to play the cop, Fuller, and O'Brien was so sick, and he was basically dying, but he apparently didn't really tell them when he was hired. So when he arrived to set, they were going to greet him coming off the airplane that he arrived to Canada to shoot this thing. This is a Canadian movie, and he got off the airplane in a wheelchair, and they were like, "Oh shit!" So they fired his ass, and they hired John Saxon, who was luckily available. And O'Brien, I believe, never didn't appear in another film. I think he died. He had like a couple of TV roles, but I don't think he ever did another movie. So yeah, John Saxon, and the last person in this movie that people have heard of is Margo Kidder, who plays the alcoholic sorority sisters, the drunk bitch, basically. And also because the characters in this movie honestly really aren't that interesting. She is a standout. I mean, she does kind of steal the movie just because the characters in this movie are pretty bland, in my opinion. I really, and that's a big issue I have with this movie. But yeah, Margo Kidder is in it, and Margo Kidder, who became very famous in the mid to late 70s for Superman. She played Lois Lane in the early Superman movies with Christopher Reeve, and then she played in the Amityville Horror. She played the female lead in the original Amityville Horror. And it's kind of ironic that she's the drunken sorority sister in this movie, partly because she apparently demanded to have actual alcohol while she was filming, and there's a reason for that. Margo Kidder had major substance abuse issues, and she kind of wrecked her career with that, so that's funny, I guess, in a mean way, but it is kind of funny. And the male lead, Peter, Olivia Hussey's love interest, the musician, the wannabe musician, is clearly way too old for his role. The man is almost 40 when he filmed this. Literally, I think he was 38 when he shot this, and he's supposed to be playing. I think he's a grad student. I think they at least went as so far as to say he's a grad student because he says he's been there for 8 years. He's still way too old for this role, and apparently the only reason that guy was in it, and that guy was kind of famous for 2001: A Space Odyssey, the classic Stanley Kubrick film, with HAL 9000. I think it was HAL 9000. What are you doing, Dave? Like that. He's starting that, and he's only in this because Olivia Hussey was in it. He wanted to work with her. He wanted to sleep with her. But so that's the only reason they got him in this movie. So yeah, they got really lucky with their cast, but yeah, they didn't get so lucky with their release. This movie was very, a mid-tier success. It was kind of here, and then it was gone, and nobody really remembered it. It actually became notorious slightly after its release, though, because there was a rumor going around that it was one of Ted Bundy's favorite movies, the famous, infamous serial killer. And that rumor, I think, actually got started because of the Chi Omega massacre when he broke into a sorority house and killed, raped, and beat a bunch of the sorority girls, which is pretty similar to what happens in this movie. But it was not true. When Ted Bundy was asked about it in an interview, his I believe his immediate response was, "What the fuck is that?" I think that's literally the quote is, "Black Christmas, what the fuck is that?" So he had never even heard of the thing, but that was enough to get it pulled from broadcast television in the 70s. Then it gained a cult following on during the VHS boom, and in the last really about 15 years or so, it's become this big major part of the genre. People talk about it a lot. A lot of people try to call it the first slasher film. I disagree. It does predate Halloween, but I actually think Torso, the Italian film, is the first slasher film. I did a video about that. So, but Black Christmas does predate Halloween. That's fair. I do not believe the rumor that Halloween was conceived as a sequel to Black Christmas. I don't see that. But regardless, Black Christmas is about. I'm talking a lot about the history of this movie because the plot. What plot? It opens with a long tracking shot, very similar to Halloween. I do think Halloween might have drawn some inspiration from this movie, but it opens with this long POV tracking shot of a character sneaking into the sorority house. This character is Billy, and the sorority girls are all having a party downstairs. He apparently lives in the attic. And in the book, it gives a lot more clarity to Billy and what's going on with him. So, in the movie, you can't understand half of what Billy says. Now, this movie actually draws inspiration from the classic urban legend where the killer is calling from inside the house. So Billy's living in the attic, and he keeps doing these obscene, deranged phone calls to the sorority girls and scaring the hell out of them. And the first phone call is actually legitimately really freaky. It is. Just the audio, the way it's shot, the women's reactions, it is freaky. And this is a well-made movie. I will give it credit for that. Bob Clark did a good job filming this thing, the cinematography, the score, all of that is very on point. And the acting's solid. I mean, these characters don't really require much acting, but the acting is pretty good. So that first phone call, like was he keep screaming, "You're piggy cunt, you're piggy," or whatever, and you just hear him babbling. it's really hard to tell what he's saying. And apparently there were three different voices. It wasn't really just one guy doing different voices, which is in the movie what's supposed to be happening. He's schizophrenic. But there were three different people all talking at once, and you really just can't understand exactly what he's saying. You hear the name Agnes, you hear the name Billy, you keep hearing "Where's the baby?" You keep hearing "Agnes, don't tell." But yeah, the first phone call is really effective, and it sets the movie off to a good tone. You get that initial kill with the girl in the jump out of the closet. That's pretty solid. Get and that's really the instigating incident for the entire movie is that this girl Claire is missing, and they're trying to find her. They don't know where she is. They end up getting the cops involved. That's where John Saxon comes in, but there's a subplot involving the female lead, the Olivia Hussey character, where she's gotten pregnant by her boyfriend Peter, played by the 2001 guy, and I can't remember his name. And there's this whole thing where they're worried. She wants to get an abortion, and that would have been really controversial when this movie was released. And it's actually got this movie a bit of a reputation as a feminist film because abortion had literally just been legalized when this flick came out. I mean, it was like 2 years before, I believe. So that would have been a very shocking thing for audiences at the time that the female lead of the movie is flat out saying, "I am terminating this pregnancy." And she's very straightforward with her boyfriend. Like, she's saying, yeah, I mean, I think she literally says, "It's my body and it's my choice," the pro-choice slogan, essentially. And, he's very against it, and it completely wrecks him. He has this big recital that he blows because of it, and then he smashes up his piano. And it feels like the movie kind of wants to be a whodunit, except that we know whodunit, so I don't understand. It feels like this movie's struggling to make its runtime, because there's not really much. We know Claire's dead, so this whole "where's Claire" thing is pretty much a yank. Like, yeah, Claire's dead, she's in the attic, we know she's there. Who's the killer? I mean, we know the killer's living in the attic, so it doesn't. I mean, it's possible that one of the boyfriends, like Peter or something, keeps climbing up there, then climbing, but it's highly friggin' unlikely. I mean, it's basically. I don't like the middle of this movie. Like, the beginning's really good. The early phone call, the tension, the setup, all that's really solid. And the end is fine. I mean, the end is good. I like the ending. The ending, yeah, it has a quick little chase scene and a good, like, gotcha down ending, actually. It's a unhappy ending. But the middle, just nothing really happens in the middle of this movie. The characters aren't interesting enough to justify my time with the movie. Even John Saxon, who's an actor I actually really like. He hasn't been in a lot of good movies, but I do enjoy the movies he's in. He's got kind of a cool everyman hero to him. He's very good at furrowing his brow and doing the intense stare, like that. I mean, he's just a regular guy, Captain Comb Over. He's obviously bald, but I like him in pretty much everything I've seen him in. I really enjoy him in the Nightmare on Elm Street movies. He was in Part 1, Part 3, and the meta one, New Nightmare, which I think was the seventh one, where he plays himself. So I like that actor a lot, but his character is just a cop. They don't give him much. It's not like he's Dr. Loomis in Halloween, where he has all these weird idiosyncrasies, or he's very driven. This is just a job for him. He's just like, okay, well, I'm a cop. I'm supposed to find this girl, so I'm gonna go look for the girl. And then they have this thing where they find a different dead girl in the park, which was Billy. It was Billy, but it doesn't ever flat out say that it was Billy. But the book kind of helps clarify that. Like I said, the book does. It's a quick read. It's only 156 pages, and it's also ridiculously hard to find. But by a guy named Lee Hayes, and it's one of those books. It's a novelization. So for people who don't pay attention to that kind of thing, a novelization is essentially a promotional tool. It's they give the screenplay to the movie they're going to make to an author, and the author just punches up a book from that screenplay, and they sell the book a few months before the movie's released to get people hyped about the movie. So this isn't based on a book. The book came from the screenplay, but the thing about novelizations is a lot of the time they're based on the screenplay, so things that might get cut or changed from the movie are left in, and the screenplay was apparently much more overt about Billy. The screenwriter was even annoyed with Bob Clark, the director, for not showing Billy. He thought that was a weird choice, and he wasn't on board with it. Now, he did at the end of, after seeing the way they did the movie, he kind of understood what they were going for, but apparently when he heard that Bob Clark was going to shoot it that way, he was against it. And the book is much more obvious about what's going on with Billy. How do you write babble? It does mention sometimes that he's babbling like a madman, but it does also have overt dialogue, and you also get his thoughts. book really does clarify Billy's backstory. Apparently, Billy was inappropriately sexually touching his baby sister. They refer to her as a baby, but she was apparently talking, so she had to be at least 3 or 4. But they call her a baby, and so Billy was inappropriately touching his sister, and she started screaming out for her mom, saying it hurts. And then he panicked and smothered her. And his parents, of course, found out, and they called him Dirty Nasty Billy and beat him. And supposedly Bob Clark said that Billy killed his parents, but that I haven't been able to find that interview, so that's on IMDb. So take that with a grain of salt. That's Billy's backstory officially, is that he was sexually abusing his baby sister Agnes. Then he accidentally killed her, and his parents found out. So, um, yeah, it also gave a backstory to the alcoholic lady that runs the sorority, where she was this vaudeville act, like a stage performer with her sister. And when she aged out of it, she started drinking, and the sister married some rich guy. But yeah, that's pretty much what you get out of the book. I mean, like I said, the book's really short, but also the book does clarify the ending a bit more. So John Saxon at the end of the movie. So what happened? What happens is they finally figure out that the calls are coming from within the house. They trace the phone call back when Billy calls, and like get out of the house, but she can't leave her friends. She doesn't know they're already dead. So she goes upstairs and she sees Billy, and in the book, Billy says, "Don't, we can't kill the baby, or don't kill the baby," something like that. In the movie, Billy just says something about "Don't tell them, Agnes." So she panics and runs downstairs, and then she hides herself in the basement. And then Peter, her boyfriend, breaks in. Now, in the book, Peter's all distraught and still crying and all freaked out, like we can't terminate, we can't kill the baby, and that makes her assume that Peter absolutely is the killer. In the movie, it's weird because Peter breaks in, but he doesn't seem at all phased. He's just like, "What's wrong? Like, why are you hiding down here?" And so it makes it a little awkward that her response would be to kill him. I mean, she does. She straight up murders Peter. And in the movie it's off screen, but that's how it happens in the book, is that he approaches her talking about the pregnancy, not just saying what's wrong, and then she beats him to death. She beats him multiple times with that piece of fire poker. And they all assume that Peter was the killer, and take her upstairs, put her to bed. And some people have said that it's kind of unrealistic that the cops wouldn't have searched the house, but I mean, honestly, it's kind of made clear that this is a small town police force, and they're kind of overwhelmed, because they say that they have to take the bodies to a morgue out of town because theirs doesn't have the facilities for an autopsy or something like that. And then they got the dad of the missing girl who faints outright, and it just seems like it's very chaotic and it's being mishandled. But the movie makes it clear that it is being mishandled canonically, I guess you'd say. It's not just that the movie doesn't understand that, yeah, a proper police procedure would probably be to take her to a hospital to treat her for shock and then do a full search of the house, because they do still have one missing girl, Claire. They never did actually find her. It shows it at the end of the movie that she's still upstairs. And the book also pretty much states that the female lead, Olivia Hussey's character, was killed by Billy. So, and there's this weird thing actually also, that apparently the studio didn't like how ambiguous Billy was either, and they wanted to have the boyfriend of Claire's boyfriend, the guy that's in the room with her at the end, to lean forward and say, "Don't tell them what we did, Agnes," making it clear that he was the killer, and Bob Clark refused. So that's the whole movie. Like I said, there's just not a lot of plot to this movie, and with not a lot of plot, the kills are okay, but they're not great. The when they stab Margo Kidder to death with that unicorn thing, that would have broken the first. I mean, I know that's overthinking it, but still, he stabs her so many times. Those things break when you knock them over. So, I mean, it's okay. Like I said, the beginning's really good. The ending's pretty solid. The middle just drags too much for me, and without having a character that I really engage with, I just kind of shrug my shoulders at this movie. It's not a movie that I really am desperate to return to. It's just like, it's an okay flick. I pretty much just did this because I really want to talk about the remakes, but I didn't want to be a dick and like trash the Black Christmas name, so because the remakes are terrible. So I'm acknowledging the good one before I go into the bad ones. So I'm gonna do that next. So I'm gonna keep doing the updates Tuesdays and Thursdays. What are you supposed to say when you do this? Like, subscribe, and share. So like, subscribe, and share. And I am going to post the Black Christmas remakes after I post this. I'm gonna do them as one video. And then next week I'm going to be doing the request that I've gotten so far. I've gotten a couple requests. I'm gonna knock those out next week. My gift to you. And that's it. See you.